Hey guys, today I wanted to make a video reviewing all the coasters at Great Adventure because I've been there quite a few times at this point, and I have a good idea of what rides are good, what rides are bad. Now, disclaimers, this is unscripted, and the only two rides that I have not been on are the Joker and Kingda Ka, but I know plenty of people who have, and I have a good idea of what they're like. So, let's get started. First ride is Batman the Ride. This is a clone. You could find it pretty much anywhere, however. Fun ride, pretty intense. Like being an invert, it's smooth. It does have a little bit of shakiness to it, but I think the intensity makes up for it. Just remember to sit towards the front, because if you're in the back, you're really going to get whipped around everything, and on a ride like this, you don't really want that. Next up, I have Bizarro. This is one of my personal favorite rides in the park. This is a B&M floorless, in fact the first B&M floorless. Goes upside down 7 times, and has a couple special effects like in the picture on screen. There's these smoke cannon things. And there's also flamethrowers and some more mist towards the end of the ride, along with a near miss, and a few themed buildings throughout it. Now, what makes this ride so great is that it's pretty smooth, none of the elements feel jerky or forced. The only thing people tend to dislike about this ride is the Cobra roll, which I don't really have a reason to dislike. It's still smooth, it's still fun, it's still just another inversion that you get to go through. And that loop on this ride is ridiculously tall. If you sit towards the back, you will feel like you are about to stall out in that loop. But again, with this ride, sit towards the front like in Batman if you want the best experience. Next up, I've got El Toro. This is easily the best ride in the entire park. It has airtime, it has bank turns, it has intensity, it has the smoothness. Now, this is an Intamin prefab, so it's pretty much guaranteed to be an extremely smooth ride, and since it's Intamin, it's also guaranteed to be extremely intense. This ride was also designed by some people at RMC, so you know it's got good taste in its layout. It has some of the most intense ejector on the planet. The front of this ride is really fun, but if you're looking for that ejector airtime, sit towards the back, probably the second row. Just be warned, the whip turns at the end will probably hit your head if you don't have it all the way back. Next up is Green Lantern, probably one of my least favorite rides in the park, and the layout's fun. The elements are great, but it's a stand-up, and it doesn't hurt where you would expect it to. It kind of is a slow burning at your legs, like where your calves are, and you feel like your legs, by the time you get off it, are about to fall off. No, I don't know if I was just standing incorrectly, but I don't think I was. I had my legs behind the line and bent, so obviously stand towards the front in this one, because the further to the back, the more force you're going to get, and on a stand-up coaster, you're not going to want that. Next up is Kingda Ka. Now, this is one of the 2 rides in the parks I have not been on, but from what I've heard from friends and people that I've talked to firsthand, it is not worth more than a 25-minute wait. Yes, it's the tallest coaster, yes, it goes fast, but it's a short ride, and pretty much everything in the park outdoes this. Now, the reason for that being that it only has 2 elements. It has that top hat, and it has an airtime hill that is half brakes. So you're not going to get any air, you're just going to get shoved into a brake run. Now, this is understandable. It's not meant to be a big, amazing coaster layout. It's meant to be kind of a gimmick for the park. Not really a gimmick, but it is the world record holder, and it goes at 128 miles per hour. So that's another thing that makes people like it, but this does get serious lines just because of the world record that it holds. So if you want to ride this, ride towards the front, because the further back you get, the more shaky it is, and from what I've heard, it's even more shaky this year, so good luck. Next, I've got Nitro, the park's B&M Hypercoaster. Now, I was first skeptical about riding this, but once I got on it, I rode in the front and I rode in the middle, and it was pretty meh, to be honest. Then I went back and I rode in the back twice, and the back was amazing. The amount of airtime you get is similar to El Toro, except it's floater. You get airtime going into both brake runs, which is pretty cool. And the first drop really pulls you over to top speed, so if there's anywhere to sit in this ride, it's definitely in the back. The front really doesn't give any unique experience, and if it has a longer wait, don't go for the front. Go for the front maybe if it's at night, if you're at Fright Night or Fright Fest. You'll have a good time, because it's really dark and you're zooming through trees, it's pretty cool. But every other occasion I'd say to sit in the back, just so you get that pull, and the brake run doesn't really even affect you that much when you go through it, it's kind of a minimal stop. Next up I've got the Runaway Mine Train, probably the roughest ride in the park, and that's because it's an Arrow mine train that opened days after the park did. So, there are a few good things about this ride. It's got a pretty good view. You can get some good shots of El Toro, if, you know, you could keep your head straight through it, which is unlikely. The further towards the back you sit, the more likely you are to get concussed. I've sat all the way in the back, all the way in the front, and in the middle, and no matter where I sit, this ride just seems to get worse and worse each time I ride it. But obviously it's going to stay open for a long time. It's one of the main kiddie coasters in the park, besides Harley Quinn, which I did not include on this list. But this is a fairly decent ride. If you sit in the back, you will get a pop of airtime on one of the hills, which is kind of surprising to me. I don't know if that's intentional or not, probably not. But yeah, not the best in the park. Next up, I've got Skull Mountain. This is the enclosed coaster at the park. This is pretty much their version of Space Mountain, and it's a pretty bootleg version. The outside of the theming makes it look really good, but it's pretty much just the same rocks on top of each other, and then eventually they form a skull with water coming out of its eyes, and it looks pretty cool. You really get that smell of the fake water as you go through the queue. You could smell the chemicals in it. It'll probably hit you as you're going through, but this ride does rack up a serious line, and that's for no particular reason whatsoever. It is a pretty whippy ride, and not in a good way. All the transitions are super snappy, and the theming that you once had on the outside, prepare to lose it, because once you go in, all that you're going to get is some extremely heavy metal music, and a skull with glowing lights in its eyes. I've rode this all the way in the back, all the way in the front, and in the middle, pretty much like everything else in the park, and no matter where I ride it, it is still crap. Next up, I have Superman Ultimate Flight. This is another clone of Great Adventure, which is no surprise. This is a Six Flags park. Superman Ultimate Flight is a B&M flying coaster, as the name suggests, and it's pretty slow. The only redeeming elements are that if you sit in the front, you could see ahead of you and get a pretty nice view of things, and the pretzel loop is cool. The other inversions on this ride are pretty subpar. The bank turns are fun. It's fun to see people's reaction when they get on it and realize that they're not going to be sitting straight. I love seeing people get on and then get raised up and get super surprised and scared. But the pretzel loop pulls some intense forces, especially if you're in the back. You're really getting pushed down into your seat. You feel like your spine is about to snap. It's pretty intense. I would definitely ride this towards the front, just because you'll get that view, and it's definitely a more enjoyable ride there. You'd stretch out your arms. You don't have to stare at people's legs. It's pretty great. Now we've got the Dark Knight Coaster. The Dark Knight Coaster is an enclosed wild mouse with some pretty cool theming, actually. And I couldn't find a picture of the inside. This is the best that I got. It looks like a rendering. Not quite sure. You've got some buildings, some lights, and towards the end, I believe you got the Joker in a car that honks a horn. Now, this is a wild mouse, so you can't expect it to be the greatest thing ever, but towards the end, it really does kind of hurt. Because you're getting whipped into a turn directly next to something that's meant to startle you, and it's meant to be a unique element to the ride, but it really fails at that. It's just not fun. You get smashed into it, then you get a loud noise in your ear. It's not an enjoyable ride, but the positive is that it does have air conditioning, so if you're warm, go ride it. Next up, I have the Joker, the second coaster in the park that I have not ridden, and the third clone in the park. Now, this is an SNS 4D free spin, and it is pretty smooth. The track is by RMC, so that's to be expected. Fun fact about this, it was originally meant to be called Total Mayhem, I believe. And it was supposed to be orange and red, but Six Flags being Six Flags rethemed it to DC because they have the rights to use DC. Now, this is super compact, and where they put it is a great idea, but the ride itself is nothing amazing. If you want to get the best ride, sit towards the left so you're facing the park. I believe that's what people say. You get a little bit more spinning. From what I've heard, the only good part is the first kick off the chain because you're guaranteed a rotation. Other than that, this ride spins freely just based on weight in the car, I believe. Obviously, it's nothing great, like I said. That is about it for this video. Peace out.